This is Roger Simon, and I'm back with Ambassador Michael Oren of Israel, historian, writer, diplomat, who has just written an article for the Los Angeles Times about the awful fires in Israel. Tell us about that, Ambassador.
Well, the fire itself was Israel's largest national disaster since its creation in 1948. It destroyed 10,000 acres of the lower Galilee, 4 million trees, displaced 17,000 people, and took 42 lives. So that's quite a national disaster. Put that in American terms, that would be immense. Yes. And Israel is accustomed to being a first responder to disasters around the world. We were first on the ground in Haiti after the earthquake. We responded to earthquakes elsewhere, including in Turkey, when there was a village in the Congo that was scorched by an oil fire. We were the first on the ground. We're not used to having to look to the world and ask for help. But we did. The Prime Minister didn't stand on pride. Prime Minister Netanyahu asked for help, and help we received.
And where did he get it from?
Well, we got it from likely places. The President Obama gave an order to the National Security Council to do everything and anything that Israel needed as quickly as possible. We received planes, helicopters, fire repressant materials, firefighters from our European and Mediterranean allies. But we also received help from some unusual sources from Turkey. And you probably aware that we've had strains in our relationship with Turkey over the last couple of years. Turkey sent 2 aircraft and crews. We received help from several neighboring Arab countries whose name they prefer that we would not cite in the news. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad, all called Prime Minister Netanyahu to express their concern and condolences, and in certain cases sent aid. So it takes a fire sometimes to show that there's I don't mean the pun intended here, no pun intended, show that there's actually a light at the end of some of the dark tunnels of the Middle East.
So do you take this as a good sign that there's some kind of human side to the Middle East problem, even though elites may not think so?
We can't lose sight of the fact that there were other elements in the Middle East, like Hamas, which basically praised God for the fire. And certainly the Iranians and Hezbollah in Lebanon were rejoicing over Israel's suffering. It's not as if the entire Middle East was coming together in a feast of love and sharing as occasioned by Israel's suffering. It wasn't the case. But it does show that even among ostensible adversaries or countries with which we have a certain degree of tension, we're brought together on the human level, on the level of caring for different communities. And keep in mind, both the victims and the rescuers, the responders in this tragedy, were Jews, Arabs, Druze, Christians, Muslims. Of the 42 people killed, even, it was a real cross-section of Israeli society. There were Druze and Arabs and Jews trying to rescue inmates in a prison who were also Israelis and Palestinians, including a number of convicted terrorists.
Was this just a one-off, or how would you expand this new openness?
It's good we seem human, but we also, for a while there, we seemed like we were a normal country receiving aid from friendly neighboring states. You know, we in Israel have grown accustomed over the past 6 decades of conflict to sometimes feeling isolated and alone in the world, sometimes feeling misunderstood. And for this moment of the last few days, we felt like we were members of a caring international community, which is not a usual feeling.
Okay, good. Well, that's good.
And,
okay, step 2, though.
Step 2 is maybe we'll follow this up with some type of contact with Turkey. For example, I was able to call my Turkish counterpart, Ambassador Tan, here in Washington, and we hadn't spoken for quite a while. And I have a great personal regard for him, and it was very good to reestablish that connection, and I hope we can build on it from there.
Okay, now let's get a little bit more negative, and I'm going to read to you a piece in Tablet magazine from the Israeli historian, who I know is a friend of yours, Benny Morris, who moved from the left to the right after 9/11. He's written this piece, Bleak House, from Dickens, obviously, and I'm going to read to you some powerful quote, at least what I thought was a powerful quote, which brings us to the current Israeli-Palestinian negotiating impasse. I'm not talking about the typical problem posed by continued or discontinued Israeli construction in West Bank settlements, which will probably be resolved after some bumps and hesitations. I am speaking of a basic strategic impasse which, unfortunately, is far more cogent and telling than the ongoing negotiations, which are unlikely to lead to a peace treaty or even framework agreement for a future peace accord. This unlikelihood stems from a set of obstacles that I see insurmountable given current political ideological mindsets. The first, the one that American and European officials never express, and if impolitely mentioned in their presence, turn away from in distaste, is that Palestinian political elites of both the so-called secular and Islamist varieties are dead set against partitioning the land of Israel/Palestine with the Jews. They regard a Palestine as their patrimony and believe that it will eventually be theirs. History, because of demography and, of course, Allah's wishes, is they believe on their side. They do not want a permanent two-state solution with a Palestinian and Arab state coexisting alongside a Jewish state. They will not compromise on this core belief and do not believe on moral and practical grounds that they should. This basic Palestinian rejectionism, amounting to a Weltanschauung, is routinely ignored or denied by most Western commentators and officials.
And I don't know if it's so much Dickensian as it is Hobbesian, Benny's view, and I do have a great admiration for him as an historian. And yes, there is great reason for skepticism. We've now been waiting for the Palestinians to rejoin us at the negotiating table. They have so far refused to do so. Arab states have not given any concessions to us, though we have made several unilateral concessions, not the least of which was a 10-month unilateral freeze on new building in the Jewish communities of the West Bank, the moratorium. That was not reciprocated in any way. So what reason then could you possibly have for optimism? Well, here are a few. A fact confirmed by these otherwise reckless WikiLeaks was that the Arab world is deeply, deeply concerned, panicked almost, about Iran. This is the first time in 62 years of Israel's existence that the Arab world, for the most part, has looked at another Middle Eastern state and not the Jewish state as their primary adversary. This is the first time where you've had a Palestinian leadership that is openly committed to the two-state solution, whether it be Abu Mazen or Fayyad. Both of them are committed to the two-state solution. You have an Israeli government, which is extremely stable, very reflective of Israeli public opinion. Wide swaths of Israeli public opinion are represented in this government. That government is committed to the two-state solution. You have an American administration which is focused on the peace process intently. Now Secretary of State Clinton is personally involved in the negotiations. All of those factors augur well. It's no guarantee. We still have to get the Palestinians to sit down. Now, Benny Morris should know that as an historian, that the last thing we thought in October of 1977 was that the following month, Anwar Sadat, the president of the most powerful Arab state, would get on an airplane and land at Tel Aviv airport. The last thing we thought in October 1973, we were engaged in a bitter war with the Egyptians, would be that 6 years later we'd have an historic peace with them. And we know, as historians looking back, that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen on the basis of history, and that there are surprises. The Middle East is not a static region, it's a highly dynamic region, and there can be changes. We also know that when leaders do engage in direct talks and go into very intensive negotiations removed from the cameras, that they can make very significant progress very, very swiftly. And when Prime Minister Netanyahu says that he believes that peace framework can be achieved within a year, he means it. I think the last thing you can accuse the Prime Minister of is being Pollyannish on issues like this. So, is this a guarantee that peace is around the corner? No, it's not. But I think that looking at this through an historic perspective, it's not unprecedented. And in many ways, the circumstances are better suited for peace today than at perhaps any time in the past.
Apropos of WikiLeaks, let me ask you a question I was going to ask you in the beginning. We at Pajamas Media and PJTV, of course, watch our competition on the Huffington Post and the Daily Kos, and we've noted in their comments section that many people there are saying that WikiLeaks is a Mossad plot.
WikiLeaks is, as a phenomenon, was reckless, irresponsible, very dangerous. I find it sometimes surprising that people who care about world peace would welcome WikiLeaks, because one of the ways you preserve world peace is through diplomacy. And diplomacy is predicated on confidentiality, and WikiLeaks impairs that confidentiality. From Israel's particular perspective, because our public message is very closely dovetails our private message, there's very little distinction. The documents you read on the WikiLeaks are pretty much what I would tell you right now, Roger. Yeah. And there were some interesting revelations, not the least of which of what several prominent Arabs have to say about Iran, the role or non-role of settlements issue in the peace process, or even the role of the peace process. Had some revelations. They're not surprises to us. I mean, we are pretty well acquainted with our region, but they may be surprising to some other readers. At the end of the day, WikiLeaks is a danger. It's a danger to stability, and we do not welcome it in any way, and we are certainly not responsible for it.
I'm not sure many people are shocked by what's in WikiLeaks.
Well, it may be shocking to some people outside of the United States. Some people reading it in the Middle East may be shocked about a Middle Eastern leader calling on American leaders to intervene militarily against Iran. I think that would be very uncomfortable for certain Middle Eastern leaders.
Are they really shocked, or are they pretending to be shocked?
Well, I think that there's a so-called Arab street,
yes,
which often has a different opinion than Arab elites. And there are certain segments of populations in the Middle East who look at Iran with a certain amount of admiration. The Iran that stands up to the great state in the United States, Iran that stands up to the little state of Israel, Iran that is assiduously trying to acquire nuclear weapons with a certain amount of admiration. And that a leader of a Muslim Arab country would call on what is perceived in the Middle East as a Christian country, the United States, to go to war against another Muslim country would be perceived as quite sensational.
Speaking of Iran, what do you think of the Stuxnet situation and the use of computer viruses to stop weapons of mass destruction?
Well, I have no information on Stuxnet, but I can tell you that the Iranians are continuing to enrich uranium. And whatever measures were taken to delay the program can't stop the program. Right. The program continues apace, and Iran is acquiring and amassing stockpiles of low-enriched uranium. It is experimenting with enriching uranium to a higher grade, to 20%. And the distance between a low-enriched grade, say, of 1% and 20% is much greater than the distance between 20% and weapons grade of 96%. So if they get up to 20%, they can get pretty quick up to 96%. Right. So if they have the requisite amount of material, they have the know-how, they have the missile program ready to go, then the danger posed by a nuclear arming Iran is very pressing indeed.
Apparently, Hillary Clinton was rebuffed by Foreign Minister Pataki of Iran and Bahrain the other day. Do you think there's some possibility of any kind of settlement?
I don't think we're particularly optimistic about the chances of a negotiating settlement. We think that the Iranians are determined to acquire nuclear weapons. And the only way to prevent them from doing that is to convince them that they are less secure with nuclear weapons than they would be without them, and that the international community led by the United States is determined to prevent them from acquiring those nuclear weapons.
Many of us have criticized Obama for not reaching out to the democracy demonstrators inside Iran. Do you think there's some logic to that?
Well, I think the administration now is taking a more active role in supporting them. But having said that, while the Iranian regime, I think, is deeply unpopular among its own population, I think there are deep divisions within that regime. I think that we would be remiss and irresponsible by pinning our hopes on some type of upheaval or uprising within Iran as a means of stopping the Iranian nuclear program. Ultimately, I believe that regime will fall. It may take many years, and we don't have many years to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
As a writer, here's a question that interests me personally. Ambassador, you're a historian, a writer, an eminent historian. How do the two Michael Orens, the diplomat and the historian, coexist together?
Well, I have two feelings about the two parts of Michael Oren. This is not the first time I've been in a government position, and you know, taking a break from writing history. And as an historian, I always had a deeper respect and even empathy for decision makers. One of the criticisms of my book about the 6 Day War, 6 Days of War, in Israel, was that I was a little bit too empathetic to Nasser. Because I could see the world through Nasser's eyes. I know what it was to sit in the cockpit, and unless you sit in the cockpit, you can't know what it feels like to bear the onus and the responsibilities of decision making. So I had that perspective as an historian. It's very popular in the history writing field to fashion oneself the hangman of history. It's actually a term used. Historians sit in their ivory paneled, ivory covered towers, and they pass judgment on decisions made by world figures 50, 60, 70 years before. I don't do that.
Or longer.
I try to see the world through their eyes and let the reader judge for themselves, let the readers judge. As a person involved in the decision-making process now, I'm aware of the historic moment. And I'm aware that we are living in historic times, that we're facing two of the greatest challenges of our time, the peace process and the Iranian nuclear program, and that historians are going to be looking very carefully at the decisions we make today. They'll be looking 50, 60, 100 years from now. I'm even aware when I write a cable that someday there's going to be somebody writing their doctoral thesis looking at this thing and saying, oh, that's interesting, or wondering whether that was the best decision they could have made. You know, it is easy. It's easy to sit back and judge, but when you're in that cockpit, I'll tell you, this is the conversation, by the way, Roger, that I have with many of my counterparts, whether in the administration or even Arab ambassadors. We talk about the onus of it all. It's a privilege, but it's also a tremendous responsibility.
I have to say that was a fascinating answer. Thank you, Ambassador Oren, for talking with us again.